Welcome back, and a Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you've all had a wonderful holiday season. I thought we'd kick off 2020 with another part in our Unsolved Murders and Missing Persons series, in the hope that this year will bring closure for some of the families who have waited so long for answers. So let's begin part 7. Stella Mary Ferrugia was raised in Sunshine, Victoria, and was the youngest child of Michael and Rose Ferrugia, who immigrated to Australia from Malta in the late 1950s. Her parents held strong beliefs on family matters arising from their traditional Maltese origins. Their conservative views were often in conflict with those of the wider Australian community at the time, which in turn often culminated in conflict within the family, particularly between Stella and her parents. Described as outgoing, kind and generous, but also a little naive and easily led, in 1983, aged 17, Stella left the family home and moved to Queensland to stay with her older sister Christine, who was newly married and living in Cairns. She began a relationship with a young man, and the couple eventually moved to Adelaide in 1984. Interestingly, this man's identity has never been revealed. They stayed at a number of addresses in Adelaide before moving to the coastal suburb of Henley Beach. The relationship eventually became strained, and they split up. Stella would later move in with another man, Wojciech Kubale. There was a suggested history of domestic violence in connection with both of Stella's relationships, but there were no reports made to police, so it's hard to gauge how true or to what extent this domestic violence was. On the 18th of October 1984, it was Kubale who reported Stella as missing. He told police that he last saw her at their home address on Seaview Road, Henley Beach, the day before. He said that he'd been out for the day and came home to find Stella's dog, her bank books and personal possessions all at the flat, but no sign of Stella. Initially, police didn't consider the matter as suspicious. They conducted inquiries, but thought Stella may have simply taken off. Perhaps the young couple had had a tiff, or Stella simply wanted to end the relationship. It wasn't until her boyfriend contacted Stella's family in Victoria to ask where she was that her disappearance was considered more concerning. The Ferrugias also reported Stella as missing to the Sunshine Police in Victoria. Stella had earlier written to her sister Christine, demanding that she make contact by a specific date, and saying that if she didn't, she would cut off all ties. That date came and went before her sister got around to replying, but sadly she never received a response from Stella. Did the now 18-year-old Stella deliberately walk away from her life and family, or was her life taken in an act of foul play? Another mysterious element to the case was that for several years after her disappearance, Stella's family received irregular phone calls where the caller did not speak when the phone was answered. The number of calls each year tapered off over time, finally stopping 5 or 6 years after Stella disappeared. Over the course of the inquiry, police examined a number of properties, including the one at Mount Torrens, where she stayed with her first boyfriend before moving to Henley Beach, but no sign of her has ever been found. Detective Sergeant George from the SA Police Major Crime Investigation Branch says that given the amount of time that has passed and the number of times her story has appeared in the media, his feeling is that it's more likely that Stella is deceased. But he adds that until such time as we have a body or a confession, there remains a faint hope that she may be alive. Wojciech Kubail, Stella's last boyfriend and the last known person to see her alive, passed away in 2010. For an undisclosed reason, Stella's disappearance was linked to convicted murder and rapist couple Barry Watts and Val May Beck. This disgusting, depraved married couple were found guilty of the brutal rape, torture and murder of 12-year-old Sian Kingi in Noosa in 1987. Beck had lured the young girl from her pushbike to help find a fictitious poodle when Watts grabbed the girl from behind. She was driven to Tinbirwa, raped, tortured, strangled and stabbed. Val May Beck, who was a mother of 6 children from a previous marriage, including a teenage girl of her own, was given a life sentence with a non-parole period of 14 years. 3 parole applications were denied. Barry Watts was given a life sentence with a recommendation never to be released. Beck later testified against Watts in the murder of student Helen Feeney, also in 1987, telling the court that Watts had dumped her body at Lowood garbage dump near Brisbane and watched it burn, but no evidence was ever recovered. Beck and Watts have also been linked to the possible murders of Sharon Phillips, 20, in Brisbane's Outer West in 1986, Stella Mary Ferrugia in Adelaide in 1984, Louise Bell, 10, abducted through her bedroom window in Hackham West, Adelaide in 1983, and Sophie Helen Woodman, 14, who left Victoria to meet a friend in Queensland in 1980 and never arrived. Despite pleas from family members, Val May Beck died in 2008 following heart surgery at the age of 64, taking any information with her to the grave. Police have released an age-progressed image of what Stella may look like today. Anyone with information in this case is encouraged to call Crime Stoppers South Australia. Rewards of up to $200,000 are being offered to anyone who provides information and assistance that leads to the conviction of those responsible for the suspected murder of Stella, or leading to the location and recovery of the victim's remains. 60-year-old Franco Murat was a French national who was born in Sardinia and later moved to South Australia with his wife and family in 1978. He was a retired chef and a former member of the French Foreign Legion. At around 10 p.m. on August 16, 1999, 3 people entered the widower's home on Prospect Road, Blair Athol, and found him asleep in his bed. They covered his head with a pillowcase and assaulted him, demanding valuables. Franco was a hobby fossicker and had a number of opals he'd discovered over the years. The house was ransacked and only the opals and a few pieces of jewellery were stolen. Then, for some cruel and inexplicable reason, the attackers doused Franco in an accelerant they had brought with them and set him alight, leaving him to die. They took the keys to his silver Magna sedan, which was found in a laneway about 1 kilometre away, totally burned out. Despite excruciating burns to his upper torso, head and face, Mr. Murat managed to run outside for help. When police and paramedics arrived, he was able to tell them that he hadn't seen the attackers, but heard the voices of 2 men and a woman. He said he did not recognise the voices. He was rushed to hospital, but sadly died from his injuries 3 weeks later. Police suspect that the jewellery and opals may have been the motive, but question the need to end the life of the father of 3 in such a barbaric way. Following Mr. Millet's death, police said there were a number of calls to Crime Stoppers, but information had since dried up. Given that 20 years has now passed, they are calling for anyone with information to come forward. A reward of up to $200,000 will be paid for any information that leads to a conviction in the case. Joyce Eastwood, her husband James, and their 6 children migrated to Australia from England, arriving in Perth by ship in 1968. Hazel Pope, her husband Andrew, and their 5 children arrived there by plane in the same year. Both families lived in an immigration hostel at Fremantle for a year, until moving to Coolyannobbing in WA's goldfields northeast of Perth, where Mr. Eastwood and Mr. Pope both worked in a mine. The 2 women became the best of friends. The families socialised together, and their 11 children happily played and grew up together. In 1970, both families moved to Christie's Beach in Adelaide South. Joyce and Hazel both worked at the Furness Furniture Factory at Edwardstown and later at the Noarlunga Meat Works. On the morning of October 8, 1970, Joyce Eastwood, along with 2 of her older sons who also worked at the meatworks plant, were picked up from home by Hazel Pope. The boys were dropped off at the gate while Hazel parked her Mini Minor car. There was a security guard on duty, and he stated that the women arrived between 7 and 8 a.m. He saw the 2 boys go inside, but the women unloaded 2 suitcases from the boot and were almost immediately picked up by a male taxi driver and drove off, leaving the car in the car park. It was later discovered that both women had handed in their resignations about a week prior, and that Hazel had withdrawn $3,400 from a joint bank account. No contact was ever received by any members of their families. The only lead came weeks later when Mr. Eastwood received an account from a shop in Perth requesting payment for goods bought by a woman using a combination of their names, Hazel Eastwood. It is of course assumed that the women, now dubbed Thelma and Louise, had planned to leave and followed the plan through. Yet everyone who knew them said it was completely out of their character to leave their children behind. Did they plan to start a new life and return for their children, but somehow met with foul play? Or was it their intention all along to walk away and never look back? Some of the children, now grown with children of their own, have officially filed a report. The following footage are extracts from Freehand TV Missing Persons Unit and is 12 years old. Joyce Eastwood and Hazel Pope have now been missing for 49 years.
A cold case gets a new investigation. Senior Constables Kate Helbig and Paul Tomlinson.
Because it was so long ago, they may have been able to create a new identity for themselves, and another option is that they could have met with foul play. It's an awful lot of children to leave behind, so it is something a bit different than a lot of other cases.
37 years after Joyce and Hazel went missing, their families have finally filed an official report. Now, the Missing Persons Unit has to discover exactly what happened when the mums disappeared back in 1970.
Hi Janet, how you going? Okay, how are you? Good, thank you.
2 of their 11 children, Joyce Eastwood's daughters, Janet and Angela, have spent decades looking for the mums without any luck.
I just thought we might go through your statements again today. There's just a few things I wouldn't mind going over again. Can you tell me your memory of the morning she left? Do you have a clear recollection of that?
Mum got up to go to work. She actually came into the bedroom to get the suitcase, and at that time I woke up. And she sort of got the suitcase down and just told me to go back to sleep. And I remember a lot of noise outside, as in people talking, and the footsteps on the gravel, and then the car leaving. So that was sort of pretty much it.
In just the last few weeks before they left, you remember Mrs. Pope and your mum talking about wigs and mum thinking of turning her hair blonde?
That's right.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
They used to quite often get together early in the evening. You know, we were asked, you know, what we thought that she might look like with blonde hair. So
The two mums, Joyce and Hazel, were acting more and more strangely in the weeks before they vanished.
You went on about her collecting money in a handkerchief.
that had been happening for quite a while.
But why was Joyce collecting the money?
I remember being told that, being told by Dad that he'd received a letter and that it was from a department store over in Perth.
It was actually a bill signed Hazel Eastwood, a combination of the two mums' names.
There was no other accounts that your father received, it was just that one that you remember?
It's crucial new information because after 4 decades, Kate finally has the evidence that Joyce and Hazel may have run off together.
It was shortly after that that Dad sort of sat us all down and said that, yeah, Mum wouldn't be coming back.
Adelaide, police are taking another one of the 11 children, Joyce's son Michael, on a journey back in time. Michael was just 7 when his mum disappeared. Now, at 43, he's asked police to take him to the meatworks where his mum and Hazel Pope worked.
Michael, this is where your mum worked, and this is where she was last seen.
37 years ago, Joyce and Hazel drove here with Michael's older brothers, Jared and Barry, who also worked here.
So this is where the luggage was dropped off?
We believe so. That's the security officer. The guard would have been there.
The boys went into work, but the women had other plans.
So they would have parked the car, then come back and got the suitcases from the security office? Yeah.
They called a taxi, loaded their bags and drove off to start their new life.
When the boys had finished work that afternoon, they came down and they were sitting on the bonnet of the car waiting for them to come back at the completion of their shift, and they waited, and eventually they decided to walk home, thinking perhaps they were both working overtime.
Michael's first visit to the old meatworks brings the memories of his missing mum flooding back.
It's like just hitting blank walls all the time and closed doors. Yeah, we just haven't found trace nor hear any of them really. And for both families to have closure would be really good too.
Kate's driving 450 kilometres to Mount Gambier to interview Joyce's brother.
I took 3 statements back in February, and I just want to have another chat to Ron to see if there's anything more that's come out.
Last year, Ron told police he actually saw his sister a few years after she disappeared in Adelaide.
How are you, sir?
Kate's hoping Ron might remember something else that will give them the breakthrough they need.
And I was going down the main street there,
King William Street.
King William Street. And about 2 seats up from the front with this lady, and we was about 3 seats from the back on the same side as her, not on, you know, and I'm looking down, I said to you, didn't I, that looks like our Joyce. And Maureen says, shall I go up? And what do you call it? Anyway, the next stop, the bus stopped, she pressed the button, it stopped, and she got off. She never once looked back at us. And I was waiting for the bus to pass to see her, you know, on the footpath. But she'd gone by the time the bus had got around. She must have nicked round the corner, gone into a building or something. But she was gone. I'd like to sit down and talk to her and just find out what went wrong and why she did what she did. Because it's not her to do that.
It's your mum and dad there on the right.
Yep.
They may have their reason for disappearing,
I can see Michael and
but try explaining that to their 11 children.
Jared.
I mean, me as a mother, I mean, I can't imagine walking away from my children, and which makes me wonder, is she still out there?
There were those periods of, you know, anger and that kind of thing, but I'd like to meet her. Yep, that would be good.
I have got, you know, beautiful children, which are her grandchildren, and beautiful great-grandchildren, you know, that I'm sure would like to have a part of her in their lives too.
Susan Goodwin was born and raised in the small town of Wonthaggi, a seaside town located 132 kilometres southeast of Melbourne in Victoria's Gippsland region. Susan was one of 5 children, but tragically, the family lost 2 daughters and a son when the car they were travelling in plunged off a bridge. Susan, then 21, was also a passenger in the car but survived. In the mid-1990s, Susan moved from Wonthaggi to Port Lincoln on South Australia's Eyre Peninsula, about 650 kilometres from Adelaide, to be with her partner, Michelle Peterson. On July 19, 2002, 39-year-old Susan failed to pick Michelle up from work at 4:15 as usual. When Michelle arrived home, she found fresh meat ready to be cooked for their evening meal. She reported Susan, who only had the clothes she was wearing and about $140 in cash, as missing. Susan was a social cannabis user, and police would later reveal they believed she was in other people's company when she disappeared. She was also last seen by witnesses that day, shopping at the Port Lincoln Coles and Woolworths supermarkets. Some witnesses say she looked distressed or distraught. She has never been seen or heard from again. Susan's case was re-looked at in 2017 as part of Operation Persist, a South Australian police initiative re-examining cold cases. Task Force Lincoln was also set up, with 12 police officers in Adelaide and Port Lincoln assisting. Posters were distributed throughout the town, and missing person beer coasters were placed in licensed premises. 5 police cars had advertising wraps on their rear windscreens calling for information, and letters were sent to prisoners in Port Lincoln Prison appealing for assistance and information. 52 calls were received, and South Australian detectives travelled to Wonthaggi to interview people who knew Susan. Detective Sergeant Justin Thompson of the Major Crime Division said that following the review, the case was presented with further opportunities for investigation. He said they now believe that Susan was murdered, probably by someone she knew, and that the killer still resides in Port Lincoln. They believe Susan's body was disposed of within a 30-kilometre radius of the town, and that someone else drove Susan's 4-wheel drive back to her property. He said it's also likely that her murder was not planned, and that there was more than one person involved, most likely in the disposing of her body. He added that there could be people in Port Lincoln who know what happened, but are holding on to secrets. As part of the 2017 review, Susan's father made a heartfelt plea from his hospital bed for information.
The father of missing Port Lincoln woman Susan Goodwin says the fresh investigation into her suspected murder couldn't have come soon enough.
Speaking exclusively to 9 News, Don Goodwin has revealed he's been diagnosed with cancer. His dying wish is for Susan's killer to be brought to justice.
Not a day goes by without Don Goodwin thinking about his lost daughter.
Oh, it's been agony really with all what's gone on. Never off my mind, day and night. I dream of it.
39-year-old Susan Goodwin disappeared from Port Lincoln in 2002. She was last seen shopping at Coles and Woolworths before returning to the home she shared with her partner, Michelle Peterson.
1 minute you might think she's dead and not alive. It's like a roller coaster.
Don strongly suspects his daughter was murdered and police agree. Last week they launched Task Force Lincoln, a fresh campaign to catch Susan's killer and to find her body, which they believe was disposed of in or around Port Lincoln.
I couldn't believe that they'd keep going for so long, but apparently they don't give up.
It's understood detectives have new persons of interest and have gone cold on an earlier theory that Susan's murder was linked to her use of cannabis. Don Goodwin says his daughter only turned to drugs after a tragic event in 1984. Then, just 21 years old, she was a passenger in a car that plunged off a bridge in regional Victoria. Susan escaped with minor injuries, but her brother and two of her sisters were killed.
She was never the same, real jittery and everything.
Once a father to 5 children, 82-year-old Don Goodwin now has only one left. He hopes his tragedy-filled life won't end without knowing what happened to Susan, but he's running out of time.
I had a heart attack, and that's how they found out I've got lung cancer. Oh, I need someone to come up with something, find something. There must be somebody knows something. Please help me. I need it badly.
Ben Avery, 9 News.
Sadly, Susan's father lost his battle with cancer in May that year, and her mother passed away in September of the same year, both never knowing what happened to their daughter. A reward of up to $200,000 is being offered for information that leads to a conviction of those responsible for her disappearance or suspected murder, or information on the location of her remains. And in some good news, SA Police have arrested a 45-year-old man and expect to charge him with the murder of Stephen Newton. Mr. Newton's decomposing body was found inside his home on Davison Street, Mount Gambier, on Friday, November 4th, 2011. His injuries indicated he had been brutally assaulted, and a number of items, including a television, DVDs, a computer game console and games, had been stolen from the property. Forensic scientists deduced from the state of his body that he'd most likely been murdered 6 to 8 days earlier. Despite an extensive investigation, police were unable to charge a suspect until the case was moved under the tenure of Operation Persist. The accused is expected to be charged as a result of a painstaking investigation conducted by Task Force Resolute. Major Crime Squad Detective Superintendent Des Bray said with this matter before the courts, police are limited in making any comment at this time. Please, spare a thought for the hundreds of friends and family members still waiting for answers. If you know anything about these cases, please contact Crime Stoppers SA.
Murder.
It's the most serious crime.
How would you feel if your friend or relative was a victim?
And the case remained unsolved.
No clues, no goodbyes, and sometimes no body.
While the killer continues to live their life.
Never charged, never held accountable.
You would feel angry, helpless and frustrated.
You'd want justice.
You can help.
If you have any information,
no matter how minor,
ring Crime Stoppers.
See a lawyer.
There's significant rewards on offer.
Please end the silence.
Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more murder, mystery and mayhem. Until next time.